Her stepsister tore her dress at mating ceremony, but Alpha King took off his cloak and covered her. The sun had just dipped behind the jagged peaks of Verrat, casting long shadows across the castle of Eldrith. The ancient walls seemed to hum with whispers of the past, stories of kings and warriors who had ruled with both iron and fire. Tonight, the grand hall was alive with anticipation. Nobles and warriors from every corner of the kingdom had gathered, their jewels and banners glinting in the torchlight, for the annual mating ceremony, a tradition that had bound clans together for generations. Lyra stood in her chamber, hands trembling as she adjusted the delicate silver clasps of her gown. The fabric shimmered like moonlight on still water, and though it was beautiful, it felt fragile, much like her heart. Her stepsister, Saren, lounged nearby, her dark eyes gleaming with a satisfaction that made Lyra uneasy. "You really think the king will notice you tonight?" Saren's voice was smooth, honeyed but sharp as a blade. "After all, he has seen many before you. He will see you and forget you." Lyra's fingers tightened around the hem of her dress. She did not respond. Words between them had always been a battle, one her stepsister seemed determined to win. But tonight was different. Tonight she would stand before King Alaric himself, the feared Alpha who ruled not just with strength, but with a reputation of unshakable authority. Her heart hammered in her chest at the thought, equal parts fear and longing. The hall was already filled when Lyra arrived, escorted by the royal guard. The air was thick with the scent of burning candles and fragrant oils, and the murmur of conversation swelled to a hum of excitement. Noble families watched, their eyes sharp and expectant, waiting to see which alliances would be strengthened and which would crumble. King Alaric sat on his elevated throne at the far end of the hall. Cloaked in black and silver, his presence commanded silence as easily as a wave commands the tide. His gaze, sharp and calculating, swept across the crowd, lingering only for a heartbeat longer on Lyra than anyone else. It was a look that unsettled her, stirring something she could not name, something dangerous and thrilling. Lyra stepped forward with cautious grace, the hem of her gown brushing the polished floor. She could feel the weight of every eye upon her. For a moment the world seemed to shrink until there was only her, the torn edges of her nerves and the piercing gaze of the Alpha King. And then it happened. Saren, moving with the precision of a predator, slipped through the crowd behind Lyra. In a moment that seemed both slow and inevitable, her fingers caught the fine fabric of Lyra's gown and pulled sharply. A long rip split the dress from hip to thigh, and the hall erupted in gasps. Lyra froze, her face burning with humiliation. She felt exposed, vulnerable, her shame magnified by the hundreds of eyes now fixed upon her. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest, and for a moment she wanted to disappear into the shadows. But then a shadow moved beside her, a figure of authority and danger. King Alaric had risen from his throne, his long cloak slipping from his shoulders. Without a word, he approached her, his presence a shield against the cold judgment of the court. With a swift motion, he draped the cloak over Lyra's trembling shoulders, covering the tear, covering her shame. The warmth of the heavy fabric against her skin startled her. It was more than protection. It was a declaration, an unspoken promise that she was under his gaze and under his protection. Her eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, the hall ceased to exist. There was no crowd, no gasps, no judgment, only the depth of his dark, haunted eyes and the strange pull she felt toward him. Saren's smile faltered. Her plan to humiliate Lyra had failed, and in its place, she saw something dangerous forming, an unexpected bond between the Alpha King and the sister she had hoped to destroy. "Step back, Lyra." Alaric's voice was calm but firm, carrying an authority that silenced the hall. "You are not hers to ruin." Lyra swallowed hard, unable to speak. Words would have betrayed her, made her seem smaller than she felt. Instead, she bowed her head slightly, letting the cloak envelop her, letting him anchor her to the moment. The ceremony continued, but the energy had shifted. The nobles whispered in softer tones, their intrigue now focused on the unusual interaction between the Alpha King and the young noblewoman. The stepsister lingered in the shadows, her plans thwarted, yet her envy simmering beneath the surface like a slow-burning fire. After the formal introductions, the court moved toward the ceremonial hall where alliances would be formally sealed. Lyra walked beside her escort, but her mind could not let go of Alaric. The way he had acted, so decisive yet protective, had stirred something unfamiliar, a mixture of awe and longing, fear and fascination. She had heard tales of his strength, of his wolf-blooded lineage that granted him power beyond ordinary men. But tonight, she saw not just the warrior, but a man capable of subtlety, of care, of connection. The hall glittered with torchlight as nobles presented themselves before the king. Lyra's turn approached, and with every step, she felt Saren's gaze like a thorn pressing into her back. She could not ignore the tension, but she refused to let it control her. This was her moment, fragile as it felt, and she would claim it. When she reached the dais, Alaric's eyes found hers again. His expression softened ever so slightly, just enough to let her glimpse the man beneath the legend. He did not speak. He did not need to. The cloak around her shoulders was more than fabric, it was a statement. In that small, unspoken gesture, she felt seen. Not for her beauty, not for her lineage, not for the ceremony itself, but for herself. And then, just as she thought she could stand there, collected and composed, Saren struck again. Not with violence this time, but with cunning. A whispered word, a sly suggestion to a visiting noble, and suddenly rumors began to spread through the hall. Lyra's bravery was questioned, her intentions questioned. Whispers rose like a tide threatening to overwhelm her. Lyra felt a tightening in her chest, a swirl of anger, embarrassment, and fear. She wanted to flee, to vanish into the night where no one could mock or judge her. But she did not. She held her head high, letting the cloak shield her, letting Alaric's presence steady her like a rock in the storm. He noticed every slight, every murmur, every flicker of malicious intent. And when the moment came for him to speak, his voice rang out clear and commanding, silencing the court. "Enough," he said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "She stands here with courage. That is all that matters." The room fell silent. Even the most scheming nobles dared not contradict him. Lyra felt her pulse slow slightly, her shame easing under the weight of his words. Yet, even as relief washed over her, a new tension took root. She could feel it in the brush of his cloak against her shoulders, in the heat of his gaze that lingered far too long. Something was being set into motion, something beyond ceremony or politics. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and entirely beyond her control. After the ceremony, as the hall emptied into the night gardens, Lyra found a moment of solitude beneath a marble archway. The moonlight painted her in silver, and for a moment she allowed herself to breathe, to feel the cloak's warmth and the memory of Alaric's eyes. She did not notice when he stepped silently onto the terrace beside her. "You handled yourself well tonight," he said, his voice low and careful, as though speaking too loudly might shatter the fragile bubble of peace around them. Lyra looked up, startled but not afraid. I tried," she admitted. Her voice was soft, but there was determination in it too. Alaric inclined his head slightly, studying her. "It is not just trying that matters. Courage does not come from perfection. It comes from facing what terrifies you and standing anyway." Lyra felt the words sink into her, a balm to the humiliation of earlier, but also a spark of something far more complex. She wanted to say more, to reach out, to speak of the confusion and longing that twisted in her chest, but the right words eluded her. Instead, she simply nodded, letting silence convey what words could not. Alaric's gaze softened, and for a heartbeat, the tension between them seemed almost fragile, almost tender. Then, a sudden movement from the shadowed garden caught their attention. Saren, lurking at the edge of the terrace, had not left. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, her lips twisted in a small, bitter smile. She knew something had shifted tonight, something she could not control, and she hated it with every part of her being. Lyra felt a shiver run down her spine. "She's still here," she whispered. Alaric's hand brushed the edge of the cloak around her shoulders, a silent promise of protection. "Let her watch," he said quietly. "It changes nothing." Lyra looked up at him, and in that moment a strange, unspoken understanding passed between them. The world was dangerous, filled with envy and scheming. But for the first time, she felt a sense of safety, not in walls or guards, but in the presence of the Alpha King himself. And yet, as the night deepened, and the stars above Eldrith blinked like distant witnesses, Lyra could not shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The pull she felt toward Alaric was more than curiosity, more than gratitude. It was a storm gathering strength, and she was at its center. A storm that would change everything. The morning after the mating ceremony, the castle of Eldrith felt different, quieter, yet undercurrents of tension pulsed through its stone halls like invisible rivers. Lyra moved carefully through corridors that once seemed familiar, noticing the sideways glances of nobles who whispered behind fans and curtains. Even in the bright daylight, the shadow of last night's events lingered. The cloak, a symbol of protection from Alaric, had not left her thoughts. It was a shield, yes, but it was also a spark, igniting feelings she was not yet ready to name. Saren, her stepsister, was relentless. That morning she swept through the chamber with an air of calculated grace, each step a declaration of dominance. Her smile was sweet but sharp, the kind that cut deeper than any blade. "You think last night proved anything?" Saren said, her voice a soft hiss. "The court forgets easily, and the king, he admires bravery, yes, but he does not forgive weakness." Lyra straightened, her gaze steady despite the simmering anger inside her. "It was not weakness," she replied, her voice calm. "It was courage." Saren's smile faltered for a moment before returning, colder this time. "We shall see," she whispered, disappearing into the shadowed halls, leaving Lyra with a weight of unease she could not shake. The day passed in a haze of court duties. Lyra met with advisors, performed ceremonial duties, and endured careful scrutiny from nobles who had learned quickly to separate bravery from foolishness. But all the while, her thoughts drifted to the Alpha King, Alaric. He had not sought her out in the morning, yet she could feel his presence in the castle. Not his physical form, but the weight of his gaze, as if he were observing her from unseen corners, always just out of reach. It unnerved her, and yet it drew her forward, a magnetic pull that she could not deny. In the afternoon, Lyra found herself wandering the gardens, a place of calm amidst the scheming halls. The air smelled of jasmine and wet stone, and the sunlight danced across the marble fountains. It was here she first realized that the king's interest in her was more than mere ceremony. Alaric appeared from the shadow of a tall cypress tree, moving with quiet precision, his cloak barely brushing the stone paths. Lyra froze, caught between surprise and the unexplainable relief his presence always brought. "You wander far from your duties," Alaric said, his tone even but edged with curiosity. "I needed air," Lyra replied honestly, though her heartbeat quickened. "The castle, it feels smaller now, even though it is so large." Alaric studied her, his dark eyes unreadable. "The castle is never too small for those who see its dangers," he said, his voice low. "And danger follows you, Lyra, not from the walls, but from those within them." Lyra followed his gaze and understood at once. Saren's figure lingered near the far edge of the garden, her lips tight with jealousy, her eyes sharp as a blade. She had not stopped scheming. She had only paused to watch, calculating, plotting. "Do you trust me?" Alaric asked suddenly, turning his attention back to Lyra. The question startled her. I do," she admitted softly, though she knew trust was fragile like glass. One misstep and it could shatter. Alaric's expression softened ever so slightly. "Then stay close," he said. For not everyone wishes you well, and I will not always be near to intervene." The next days were a whirlwind of intrigue. Lyra discovered that Saren had conspired not only against her, but also against Alaric. Letters had been intercepted, suggesting that rival clans were plotting to undermine the Alpha King by embarrassing those closest to him. The threads of conspiracy were tangled and dangerous, and Lyra realized that her survival, and perhaps Alaric's, depended on careful action. In secret moments, Alaric sought her counsel, not as a king to a subject, but as a warrior to one who had proven herself brave. In the moonlit gardens, he spoke of the dangers of trust, of loyalty, and of the weight of leadership. And in return, Lyra spoke of her fears, her doubts, and the strange pull she felt toward him. One night, under the light of a silver moon, Lyra and Alaric walked the garden paths in silence. The night was alive with the chirping of crickets and the soft rustle of leaves, but tension lingered, thick as fog. "You carry a fire in you," Alaric said quietly, breaking the silence. "Stronger than I expected." It is rare to see courage so pure, unshielded by ambition or pretense. Lyra felt a warmth rise in her chest. I do not always know if it is enough," she admitted. "But I cannot turn away from what is right, even if it puts me in danger." Alaric's eyes softened, and for a moment the distance between them seemed smaller. "Danger follows those who are true," he said. "But perhaps you will learn that not all dangers are meant to destroy. Some forge strength." Yet, even as trust grew, so did tension. Saren's schemes became bolder. She began to spread rumors, subtle and venomous, suggesting that Lyra's courage was reckless, that she sought attention, that she could not be trusted with the king's confidence. Whispers followed Lyra wherever she went, shadows that clung to her like the chill of early winter. The breaking point came during a council meeting. Lyra presented intelligence she had gathered about rival clans planning to breach the kingdom's borders. Her voice was steady, her words precise, but Saren had planted doubts. "You rely too heavily on rumor and half-truths," Saren said, her voice smooth and commanding, turning the council's attention like a tide. "If the king is to trust you, he must see more than bravado. He must see competence, precision, not theatrics." Lyra's hands trembled slightly, but she held her head high. Alaric watched, his expression a careful mask, betraying nothing to the assembly. But when the room broke into murmurs, his eyes found Lyra's. There was a spark there, a silent promise that he believed her, that he would not let her fall under Saren's machinations. Later, in the solitude of the royal gardens, Alaric spoke plainly. "You must understand, Lyra," he said, voice low. "The world sees only what it wishes. Strength, courage, loyalty, they are tested not in comfort but in conflict, and right now they are testing you." Lyra listened, her heart pounding. "Then I must endure," she said, "even if it breaks me." Alaric stepped closer, his cloak brushing against hers. "Endurance alone is not enough," he said. "You must learn to wield your courage like a weapon, and know that not every battle is fought with sword or shield. Some are fought with the heart." The days passed, each filled with careful maneuvers, whispered threats, and subtle power plays. Lyra began to understand the delicate balance of court life, the weight of her words, the sharp edge of her silence, and the invisible chains of expectation that bound every noble to tradition and politics. But the bond between her and Alaric grew stronger. Every secret meeting, every shared glance, every small act of protection pulled them closer, though neither spoke openly of the feelings stirring between them. There was longing, yes, but also restraint, a recognition that their connection, while undeniable, was dangerous. One evening, as twilight painted the castle in shades of violet and gold, Lyra found herself at the edge of the forest that bordered Eldrith. The scent of pine and damp earth filled the air, and she felt the pull of the unknown, a call to step beyond the castle walls and discover truths hidden in shadow. Alaric appeared silently at her side, his presence as commanding as ever. "The night is not safe for wandering," he said, his voice a soft warning. I felt drawn here," Lyra confessed. "There is something waiting, I think, something I cannot name." Alaric studied her, the moonlight catching the angles of his face, making him appear almost otherworldly. "There are many things that wait," he said. "Some are dangerous, some are necessary, but whatever you seek, you will not find it alone." Lyra met his gaze, and in that moment, fear and desire, trust and uncertainty, intertwined. She wanted to step closer, to reach out, to lean into the warmth of his presence, but something held her back. The world was dangerous. Her stepsister's envy, the rival clans plotting, the weight of the Alpha King's power, they all loomed over her like storm clouds. And yet, as Alaric's hand brushed hers in a fleeting, protective gesture, Lyra felt something else, a spark, fragile but persistent, of hope and connection. The castle of Eldrith had never been quieter. A tension hung in the air, heavier than the thick stone walls could contain. Shadows moved differently here, whispered differently. Lyra could feel it in the soles of her feet as she walked the corridors. Danger was coming, and this time it would not wait for ceremony or courtesy. It began with the first attack on the outer village near the castle, a raid by rival clans seeking to destabilize King Alaric's rule. The guards had returned in haste, bloodied and shaken, carrying news of families lost and supplies taken. Lyra listened in horror, her chest tight with worry. The weight of responsibility pressed upon her. She had thought the court's battles were confined to whispered rumors and jealous nobles, but this was real. Alaric stood at the highest balcony of the castle, the wind tugging at his black cloak. His dark eyes were sharp, piercing the horizon, reading danger where others saw calm. The Alpha King was not one to be startled, yet even he felt the tension coiling in the air like a living thing. "Lyra," he said, his voice low but commanding, "the clans are testing us, and tonight you will understand that trust is more than words, it is survival." Lyra stepped beside him, her hands gripping the balcony stone. She had been trained to remain poised, to keep fear under control, yet her heart thudded painfully. I am ready," she said, though the uncertainty in her voice betrayed her calm facade. Alaric turned to her, eyes dark and unreadable. "Bravery alone will not save you. You must be clever, observant, and unafraid of the darkness that walks beside us." Lyra nodded. "I understand." The attack came under cover of darkness. Moonlight filtered through the clouds, casting silver streaks across the forest outside Eldrith. Lyra had been sent to gather intelligence in the outer perimeter, accompanied by a handful of guards. The forest was silent at first, too silent, and the air smelled of damp earth and distant smoke. "Something is wrong," whispered one of the guards. Before Lyra could answer, a sudden flash of movement struck the camp. Rival warriors, cloaked in dark leather and wielding curved blades, emerged from the shadows. The guards drew swords, but they were outnumbered. Chaos erupted. Shouts pierced the night, the clash of metal ringing against trees. Lyra froze for a heartbeat, paralyzed by fear, until she heard a voice, low, commanding, alive with authority and danger. "Stay behind me." It was Alaric. He appeared like a shadow of the night itself, moving with impossible speed, striking with precision and power. His presence alone seemed to carve space, creating a protective bubble around Lyra. The soldiers around him rallied, their courage strengthened by his unyielding command. But the danger was not so easily contained. One of the warriors lunged at Lyra from the side. She stumbled, heart hammering, and felt a cold, sharp fear grip her. Alaric's hand shot out. In a blur, he caught her by the waist, pulling her behind him as his other hand struck the intruder down. There was a raw intensity in his movements, more than human, more than kingly. Lyra's eyes widened as she saw a fleeting glimpse of something darker behind his eyes, a wolf's feral intensity, a primal power that he kept tightly reined. After the skirmish, the forest was eerily silent again. The injured were attended to, and the fallen were mourned in hushed whispers. Lyra's legs shook, but she refused to collapse. She had seen the wolf within Alaric, a force both terrifying and protective, and she could not deny the awe and fear it stirred in her. "You saw it," he said quietly, his gaze on her. "The wolf I carry, it is not a legend nor a story to frighten children. It is a curse and a gift intertwined. I fight it always, but it is part of me, part of the reason I command loyalty and fear alike." Lyra nodded slowly. "It does not frighten me," she said softly. It makes me see you not just the king, but the man you are, the one who fights for your people." Alaric's expression softened, and for a fleeting moment the alpha warrior seemed almost human, almost vulnerable. "You understand more than most," he murmured. "And yet that understanding comes with danger. You are not a warrior, Lyra. You are human, fragile but brave. I cannot always shield you." Lyra's heart clenched at his words, the mixture of care and warning echoing in her chest. I want to be near you," she whispered, "even if it is dangerous." Alaric's hand brushed hers, a fleeting touch, yet enough to send warmth flooding through her. He did not speak, only nodded, acknowledging her courage, her defiance, and perhaps the bond growing between them. Back in the castle, news of the forest attack had spread. The court buzzed with panic and speculation. Saren watched from the shadows, her envy twisting into something darker, more desperate. She had followed them unseen, and now plotted how to use the chaos to her advantage. Lyra, though exhausted, could not ignore her stepsister's presence. Every glance, every whispered word, every subtle manipulation was a reminder that danger came not just from enemies outside the walls, but also from within. Days passed in tense vigilance. Alaric and Lyra trained together in secret, not with swords but with strategy and observation. He taught her to read the movements of those around her, to notice subtle signs of deceit, to anticipate threats before they arrived. And in these quiet moments, their bond deepened. One night, under the silver glow of the full moon, Alaric brought Lyra to the castle's edge overlooking the valley below. The wind tugged at her hair, carrying the scent of pine and distant fire. "Tonight," Alaric said, his voice low and solemn, "the wolf within me will rise. You must know, if I lose control, it could harm you." Lyra's gaze met his. "I trust you," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "even if I am afraid." Alaric studied her for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. Then, with a controlled breath, he allowed the wolf to surface. His body shifted, movements sharper, eyes glowing with a predatory light. Lyra felt both fear and fascination, her heart pounding as she watched the Alpha King wrestle with the beast inside him. "Do not turn away," he said, his voice a mixture of command and plea. "You must see all of me, the light and the darkness." Lyra did not step back. She held his gaze, steady despite the fear clawing at her. And in that moment, she realized that their bond was no longer just political or circumstantial. It was something deeper, something forged in trust and courage. But peace was fleeting. From the shadows of the balcony above, Saren watched, a cruel smile on her lips. She had observed the transformation, the bond, the vulnerability, and she knew exactly how to exploit it. The next morning, the court awoke to news that rival clans had infiltrated the castle outskirts. A trap had been set, and the king's forces were stretched thin. Lyra's quick thinking had helped avert disaster before, but this time the threat was closer, personal. Alaric summoned Lyra to the council chamber. His expression was grim, his eyes stormy. "They are inside," he said, "and they are not alone. Someone has betrayed us from within." Lyra's breath caught. "Who?" she asked. Alaric's jaw tightened. "I do not know, but the evidence points to someone close, someone who knows our movements, our weaknesses." Lyra's mind raced. She thought of Saren, of whispered rumors, of the careful attention her stepsister had paid to every moment of her training, every interaction with the Alpha King. Could Saren truly be capable of treachery this deep? Alaric reached for her hand, a steadying touch amid the storm of fear. "Whatever comes," he said, "we face it together. You are not alone, Lyra, not in this fight, not in any fight." The words were both a comfort and a warning. Danger lurked everywhere, yet the bond between them had never been stronger. As night fell, the castle grew still. Lyra stood at her chamber window, the moonlight washing over her, casting silver shadows across the walls. Below, the gardens were empty, but she could sense movement, shadows that did not belong, whispers that spoke of schemes yet to unfold. And then a figure emerged from the darkness, Saren. She had crossed the boundaries of loyalty and envy, moving closer to the heart of danger than Lyra had ever imagined. In her hand she carried evidence, letters, forged documents, secrets stolen from the court, that could destroy Lyra's reputation and perhaps even endanger the Alpha King himself. Lyra's heart pounded as she realized the stakes. The forest attack, the wolf blood curse, the political scheming. It was all leading to a single, unavoidable confrontation. And she knew, deep in her bones, that the coming days would test courage, trust, and love like never before. The night air was thick with tension, heavier than the stones of Eldrith itself. Lyra stood at the edge of the courtyard, her cloak wrapped tightly around her shoulders, still smelling faintly of Alaric's presence from the night before. The castle had been on high alert since the rival clans had infiltrated the outskirts, and now the threat had moved closer, inside the very walls of power. Alaric approached silently, his cloak brushing the ground, his eyes dark and alert. His wolf blood instincts stirred in the shadows, sensing danger before it arrived. But unlike before, Lyra did not falter beside him. She had faced whispers, envy, and fear, and tonight she would face blood and betrayal. "They are here," Alaric murmured, his voice low, carrying a storm beneath calm control. "And they will not leave without claiming what they think belongs to them." Lyra swallowed, her fingers brushing the edges of the cloak he had once draped over her at the ceremony. That single act had bound her to him in ways she had not fully understood until now. "Then we stand together," she said firmly, her voice carrying over the courtyard. "Whatever comes, I am here." Alaric's lips twitched in what could almost be called a smile, rare and fleeting. "Good," he said, "because tonight we fight not only for the castle but for everything we hold dear." The attack came at midnight, swift and merciless. The rival clans had found a weakness in the castle's defenses, and their warriors surged through the outer gates with a precision that spoke of careful planning. Torches blazed, swords clanged, and shouts echoed through the hallways. Chaos wrapped Eldrith in a blanket of fire and fear. Lyra did not hesitate. She moved with a mix of courage and cunning, guiding injured guards to safety, helping barricade doors, and using every lesson Alaric had taught her in the past weeks. The court had once seemed a cage of whispered threats. Now it became a battlefield where she proved her worth, not just as a noblewoman, but as a force to be reckoned with. Alaric fought at the forefront, his movements precise, deadly, yet protective. The wolf within him flared, claws of instinct sharpening his senses, his strength amplifying his speed. He cut through the enemy ranks, always aware of Lyra's location, always pulling her back from danger with a whisper, a gesture, or a shield of his presence. In the midst of the fray, Lyra was cornered by a band of enemies, their blades glinting in the torchlight. She froze for a heartbeat, fear prickling at her skin, until Alaric appeared beside her, his eyes glowing faintly under the moon. The wolf inside him surged, a predator unleashed yet controlled, and he dispatched the attackers with an ease that was both terrifying and awe-inspiring. Lyra stepped back, chest heaving, eyes wide. "Alaric the wolf," she whispered, realizing in full the depth of the power he carried, the danger he wrestled with every moment. Alaric reached for her hand, steadying her. "It is a part of me," he said, voice low and firm. "But it does not define me, my choices do. And I choose to protect you." Meanwhile, Saren moved through the chaos like a shadow, her envy sharper than any blade. She had intended to betray Lyra completely, to ensure that the king's focus would shift and the clans would triumph. but she underestimated the bond between Lyra and Alaric. Every move she made was anticipated, every plan countered. The confrontation came in the castle's inner hall, a room of stone pillars and glowing braziers. Saren stepped forward, evidence of her schemes clutched tightly in her hands. "You think you can outshine me?" she sneered, her eyes flashing with malice. "The king is mine to command, the castle mine to control. And you," she hissed at Lyra, "you are nothing but a shadow trying to take a place you do not deserve." Lyra stood her ground, her shoulders straight, her gaze steady. "I do not seek to take anything," she said. "I only seek to protect those I care for. And I will not let fear or envy dictate my actions." Alaric's voice echoed behind her, calm yet lethal. "Enough, Saren. Your schemes end tonight." His eyes locked on hers, and in that moment Lyra felt the full force of his presence, both king and alpha, both human and wolf-blooded protector. Saren faltered under his gaze, realizing that all her whispered manipulations and stolen secrets could not withstand the bond forged between Lyra and Alaric. Defiance turned to desperation, and she fled into the night, her schemes unraveling. The battle outside had ended, the rival clans scattered or captured, but the air remained tense. The castle bore scars, broken doors, scorched stone, and the echoes of screams, but its walls had held. And in the center of it all, Alaric and Lyra stood, breathing heavily, eyes locked. "You were extraordinary," Alaric said quietly, taking her hand in his. "I saw you tonight, Lyra, not as a noblewoman, not as a girl, but as someone who faces fear and danger without flinching. You are stronger than you know." Lyra's cheeks flushed, not from exertion but from the intensity of his gaze. "I only did what I had to," she said softly. Because we," her voice faltered, overwhelmed by the unspoken connection between them. Alaric leaned closer, the wolf-blooded intensity in his eyes softened by the human warmth he reserved for her alone. "Because we," he repeated, letting the words linger in the night air, "is what matters, and together we are unstoppable." In the days that followed, the castle slowly returned to order. Repairs were made, injured soldiers tended, and the court resumed its duties, though whispers now carried all rather than malice. Lyra had proven herself, not just in courage, but in wisdom and loyalty. Alaric's trust in her had grown beyond protection. It had become respect, and something far more tender. Saren's exile was formal and silent, her schemes undone by her own arrogance and Lyra's steadfast courage. The court accepted her departure with relief, and Lyra, though wary of vengeance, chose mercy. She knew that true strength came not from destroying others, but from holding fast to integrity, even in the face of betrayal. One evening, under the same silver moon that had witnessed Alaric's wolf-blood emergence, Lyra and Alaric walked the castle gardens. The air was calm, the flowers whispering with the soft wind. "You are changed," Alaric said, his hand brushing against hers. "Stronger, wiser, and braver than the girl I first protected." Lyra smiled softly. "And you are more than the Alpha King," she said. "More than the wolf you fight within. You are a man who can trust, who can love, and who can see me as I am." Alaric stopped, turning to face her fully. "And I do see you," he said, voice low and reverent. "I see your courage, your strength, your heart. I see the woman who stood beside me when the world was against us." Lyra's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, a mixture of relief, pride, and the ache of everything they had endured. "Then we face whatever comes next," she said softly, "together." Alaric's hand found hers, fingers intertwining, and the wolf within him stilled, calmed by the trust and bond they shared. "Together," he echoed. In the weeks that followed, the kingdom of Verrat began to remember the events not just as battle or betrayal, but as legend. Tales of the brave noblewoman and the Alpha King who carried a wolf's heart spread through villages and castles alike. Their story became mythic, not of conquest or cruelty, but of courage, trust, and the transformation that comes from facing both darkness and desire. Lyra and Alaric stood atop the castle walls one evening, looking over the valley. The moonlight painted the forest and mountains in silver, and a gentle wind carried the scent of pine and earth. They did not speak, only held hands, their connection stronger than words could capture. "You saved me," Lyra said at last, her voice a whisper. "And you saved me," Alaric replied, his gaze on the horizon, yet always returning to her. "From myself, from the world, from the shadow that I once thought I could never escape." Lyra smiled, leaning slightly into him. "Then we are free." Alaric's lips curved into a rare smile, human and gentle. "Free," he said. "Free to stand together, free to face whatever comes, free to be us." The castle, the court, the rival clans, all seemed distant, mere echoes compared to the bond forged between them. In the silence of the night, beneath the glow of the moon and the watchful stars, Lyra realized that love, courage, and trust could transform even the darkest of nights into something enduring and eternal.